Hi, everyone. We're going to give everyone an extra minute or two to get logged on, and then we'll kick things off. So just bear with us about a minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you joining, we're just going to give it another minute for everyone to get logged on, then we'll get started. All right, we'll go ahead and kick things off. So welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining today's webinar, Wi-Fi Guest of Honor, Guest Access and Analytics via the Cloud. Throughout today's session, our presenter, David Coleman, who's one of our directors of product marketing, will cover numerous topics, including Wi-Fi guest networking basics, simple and secure guest onboarding options, how guest analytics and engagement works, as well as specifics of secure guest access options. Just before I pass it over to David, just want to go over a couple housekeeping items. Everyone is in listen-only mode, so if you do have questions, just be sure to submit them through the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to promptly answer those if we can't get to them at the close of today's webinar. And this session is being recorded, and so the on-demand version will be available to everyone who attended within 24 hours. So with that, David, you can take it away.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So if you don't know who I am, my name is David Coleman. I'm a director of product marketing for Extreme Networks. I'm CWNE number 4. There is my Twitter address at Mr. Multipath. Always looking for more followers. I know people like to make fun of me for that, but believe it or not, the Wi-Fi community is very active on Twitter. And so once again, we're here. I'm also the co-author of this big fat book right here about Wi-Fi. It's actually the 6th edition is going to be available in shipping in about 4 weeks. It is a vendor neutral book about anything and everything to do with Wi-Fi. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you take a look at that as well. Now, our topic, though, is our agenda is, as Kyle mentioned, we're going to talk about Wi-Fi Guest 101. We're going to get into guest management and onboarding options, and then we're going to talk about secure and encrypted guest access, as well as guest analytics, and then we're going to give you an introduction to our guest management solution called ExtremeGuest Essentials. So with that, let's go ahead and get into Guest Access 101. All the things that you need to think about if you're going to provide guest access via Wi-Fi. So a lot of studies have shown that, providing WLAN guest access and Wi-Fi guest access is going to be beneficial for your business. It's going to improve productivity. Customers and contractors often need access to the internet to accomplish job-related duties. So if customers and contractors are more productive, your company employees are also going to be more productive. Even more importantly, it breeds customer loyalty. So in today's world, business customers have come to expect guest Wi-Fi access. Free guest access is considered basically a value-added service for just about any industry or vertical these days. And there's a good chance that if your customers will move to your competitors if you do not provide some sort of guest access, especially if you're in the service or retail industries. So it's really kind of become a given that in most verticals and industries, you're going to have to provide guest access because Wi-Fi is part of our culture. Now, I always like to say that there's 4 common guest Wi-Fi best practices that you need to think about. And I'll do these from a high level, and then we'll get into these in greater detail on each slide. So probably the 4 things you're normally going to be needing, or at least 3 of them, are the guest SSID, where wireless guest users are always connect to a separate guest SSID because they're going to have different security policies than a corporate or employee SSID. So so that's almost always a given that you're going to have a segmented on a separate SSID altogether. Absolutely a guest VLAN. So your guest user traffic should be segmented into a unique VLAN tied to an IP subnet that does not mix with employee user traffic and VLANs. Captive web portals, we're going to talk in more great detail. Not every guest access network has captive web portals, but they're pretty standard. And they're basically used to accept guest login credentials and also have a legal disclaimer. Now, we're going to get into this in greater detail because the user experience with captive web portals, if you're going to use them, is extremely important. Probably the most important thing is the one I have here in the bottom, and there's a reason I have it in red, and that's the guest firewall policy. That is the most important component, and it's all about restricting access, and we'll talk more about that. So let's talk about these individually here. So first of all, you're going to have, the guest SSID, that's a given. You got to have a separate guest SSID in almost every case. And very often that guest SSID is then tied to a guest VLAN that is tied to a very unique IP subnet that does not mix with employee VLANs. So segmenting your guest users into a unique VLAN is a long security and management best practice. The main debate has always been whether the guest VLAN whether or not the guest VLAN should be supported at the edge of the network, like you kind of see in this diagram right here. Maybe you have all the user VLANs trunked at the edge of the network going to your cloud access point, for example. But that's not the only way. There's always more than one way to skin a cat. So probably a design scenario that's not as common as it used to be was to segment the guest VLAN and subnet in a DMZ, and it wasn't supported at the edge, and you would tunnel all the user traffic to some sort of VPN or GRE appliance or router that was basically isolated in a DMZ. So the guest VLAN wasn't even at the access layer. So it's just a different design strategy. There's no right or wrong. Now that most vendors, like especially Extreme, can do policy enforcement at the edge, either at the switch level or at the AP level. I can make an argument that there's no reason to do this right here, but there's once again, there's no right or wrong. It's up to you whether or not you want to have the guest VLAN at the edge or whether you want to tunnel that guest traffic back to a DMZ. Now, speaking of policy enforcement, the most important thing is the guest firewall policy. So whether this is done back in the DMZ or it's done at the edge of the network or wherever your firewall component exists, you have to do this. You need to ensure, this is the most important part of guest security. It's that the guest firewall policy ensures that guest user traffic it doesn't come anywhere near your network infrastructure. And effectively, a good guest firewall policy should just segment it from the employee traffic. And the most important things is, number one, it's going to restrict it from all the internal private networks as shown in this policy right here. You will have to allow for DHCP and DNS. Very often, a guest firewall policy's main purpose is it just routes all the traffic to a gateway to the internet and steers it clear of any of the internal private networks, and that's very important. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit more. You're going to restrict this at the port level as well. So some ports you're going to have open, okay? So you need DNS UDP open, port 43, okay? Excuse me, 53, oops. And obviously, guest users are going to need IP connectivity, so you have to have DHCP server UDP port 62 open. The main purpose of guest networks is to allow internet access, meaning they're going to be doing browsing. So you need both port 80 and TCP port 443 for HTTP as well as SSL have to be permitted. So at a minimum, you need all that open. I typically recommend that you also open IPsec VPN ports because guest users might have their own corporate security policy that if they're using a company laptop and they're on your guest network, that they have to use an IPsec VPN for protection purposes, which is a recommended good practice in general. So for them to access their own corporate stuff through your guest network, you should allow Internet Key Exchange UDP port 500 and IPsec NAT transversal UDP port 4500 should be permitted so that those VPNs can get through on your guest network. But it's totally up to you. As a matter of fact, guest firewall policies can be much more restrictive. So depending on your company policy, many more ports might be blocked or for whatever reason might be open. One practice is kind of an older practice was to force guest users to use webmail and block SMTP and other email ports so that guest users couldn't spam through your guest wireless LAN. However, most mail services now use some form of SSL, so this practice isn't as common anymore. So once again, it's up to the policy of the company to determine which ports need to be blocked on the guest VLAN and subnet. Pardon me. Now, in addition to a stateful firewall capability, Wi-Fi vendors and networking vendors have begun to build, for years now, have been building application layer firewalls capable of deep packet inspection into their wireless LAN controllers, or as Extreme does into our access points. So an application layer, modern day firewall can block specific applications or groups of applications. For example, some popular video streaming applications can be blocked on a guest SSID if you choose to do that, as shown in this policy right here. Once again, it's up to the company to decide what gets blocked or what gets rate limited for that matter as well. You should know that every Extreme Networks cloud-based access point has a layer 2 through layer 7 firewall built right into the access point. So you can do the policy enforcement right there at the edge of the network. Pardon me, I've got, here we go, sorry about that. Okay, now captive web portals. So let's talk a little bit about captive web portals. So everybody that's been on a guest network, you've had the captive web portal experience. And often guest users log in through a captive web portal page before they're given access to the guest, to the internet, the gateway to the internet. So you probably used it at Starbucks or the airport or a hotel or wherever. One of the most important aspects of a captive web portal might be the legal disclaimer. A good legal disclaimer basically tells the guest users about acceptable behavior. Not that they're going to read it, but you're protecting yourself legally, and you're basically, let your lawyers write it. We have default ones we can give you, but very often it's basically the guest user promises to behave. And by the way, if something bad happens to the guest user while they're on your Wi-Fi, that they can't sue you. Captive portals, where they reside, it depends. So they can reside as a standalone server solution, or they could be a cloud-based service. Addition, most wireless LAN vendors offer some sort of integrated solution. This could be in their controller or even could be in the access point. And having the ability to customize captive web portals is also important as well. Now, here's one that a lot of people don't think about with captive portals. a lot of people just don't like them at all. As a matter of fact, some people tried not to use them on their guest networks. However, I'll say this, the bulk customers like them for a lot of different reasons. One is the legal disclaimer. Another, sometimes they can do a little bit of marketing via the captive web portals and for some other things. But you need to keep in mind that the captive web portal requires user interaction. And sometimes the guest user experience can be adversely affected. And captive web portals often fail after browser updates or operating system updates. DNS problems are the number one cause of captive web portal problems. That's why if you ever have a captive web portal that's not working, just type in 1.1.1.1 in the browser. And if it comes up, you have a DNS problem. It's always the DNS. Furthermore, a lot of the design of many captive web portals isn't user-friendly. Additionally, smartphone vendors like Samsung and Apple are now devising more sophisticated methods of MAC address randomization into their devices. And MAC randomization is implemented by the smartphone vendors as a means to address privacy concerns. However, the authorized state of a captive web portal is very often tied to the MAC address of the registered device. So depending on the frequency of the MAC address randomization, guest users might be forced to re-authenticate multiple times via the captive web portal. So keep that in mind, and MAC randomization is always changing. At some point in time, just about everyone has had a bad experience with the captive web portal. Captive web portals should be a simple design. They should be straightforward. They should be thoroughly tested to provide the best quality user experience. I cannot emphasize how important that is if you're going to use captive web portals. One more thing about captive web portals, there's different methods of redirection. So effectively, a captive web portal solution turns a web browser into an authentication service. To authenticate, the user must first connect to the Wi-Fi and launch a web browser. And then after the browser is launched, the user attempts to go to a website, but then what happens is they're redirected to the captive web portal webpage. And how that is done is different. There's different methods. And once again, as I mentioned, where the captive web portal actually reside depends on the solution. But once they're redirected, the methods of redirection can be IP redirection, HTTP redirection. The most popular one seems to be DNS redirection. So once again, I mentioned a lot of times when captive web portals fail, it's a DNS issue. So be aware of that. And always remember that, because that's a kind of a troubleshooting 101 if captive web portals fail. There's other components to guest security when you're providing your guest VLAN, and one is client isolation. So when guest users are connected to the guest SSID, they're all on the same VLAN, right? And the same IP subnet. So besides that, they were the problem with that is the guest users could then do peer-to-peer attacks on each other. So that's why most guest solutions, especially at public hotspots, but at really any guest VLAN and subnet, should have some sort of peer-to-peer blocking capability. So they're all on the same subnet, but you're blocking the communications, the peer-to-peer communications. It has a lot of different names. It's called peer blocking, client isolation, and everybody has a different way of doing it, and most vendors have it. The client isolation feature, it's going to depend on the vendor. It's usually configurable per SSID, so you could do it on the guest SSID only, linked to a very unique VLAN. And it's pretty much a highly recommended practice to prevent peer-to-peer attacks. Another thing that has traditionally been done for guest traffic on guest networks is rate limiting. So let's talk about this a little bit. So enterprise wireless LAN vendors offer the capability to throttle bandwidth of data traffic. And this is sometimes called bandwidth throttling or rate limiting. And it's used to curb traffic on the SSID level, or it can be done at the user level. Rate limiting is often utilized on guest Wi-Fi LANs, and it's to ensure that the bandwidth is reserved for your employees. Very often it's common guest practice to limit your guest traffic to 102.4 kbps per device. However, because guest access is usually, I'm going to make a counter argument to this. Although a lot of people do this, I have a different take on it these days. It's a value-added service, right? So if you're providing guest access and you're rate limiting them, you're not necessarily providing really good a value-added service. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but just remember, this rate limiting may not be a good idea because it might, once again, affect the user experience for the guests, and there might be a negative connotation. So I don't really do that much anymore, but some customers and people still like to do that, but it's up to you. You do see that still done quite a bit on hotspots, but it's up to you and your company whether you do rate limiting. I will say this, another component is also content filtering. So a lot of companies have content filter solutions to restrict the type of websites that employees can access, like gambling or whatever. And the same thing can be done on the guest VLAN if you so choose to do that. So sometimes guest traffic is also routed through the corporate content filter solution as well. All right, so we've talked a lot about a lot of 101 capabilities for guest access. Let's talk more now about guest management and onboarding, which really is kind of evolved into its own art form. So as Wi-Fi has evolved, so has Wi-Fi and wireless LAN guest management solutions. Most guest wireless LANs require guest users to authenticate via credentials via a captive web portal. Therefore, there's a database somewhere that is created of user credentials that has to be created. So unlike users that already exist in a pre-existing Active Directory database, a database of guest user accounts is typically created on the fly as the guests come. So it's not an existing database, it's created on the fly. And that's where the guest management comes into play. So a guest management server can be cloud-based solution, it can be or it can be an on-premises server in the company data center. Although most guest management solutions are built around a radius server, the guest management solution also offers features in addition to radius. So very modern day guest management solutions, the good ones anyway, also offer a lot of reporting capabilities for auditing purposes and compliance requirements. And very often you see these guest management solutions as overlays, and they're often packaged either as an overlay service, third-party overlay service, and they also include analytics. Okay, so very often guest management solutions doesn't come from necessarily your Wi-Fi networking company. They might come from a third-party service company. So let's get into the onboarding side of things. So traditionally, guest management solutions have relied on a company receptionist or a lobby ambassador to register the guest users. A good guest management solution allows the receptionist to register a single guest or multiple guests or groups of users in advance. But over the past few years, there's been a greater push and emphasis for guest self-registration capabilities. And there's so many different ways to do this. But one way is like when guest users are redirected to a captive web portal, they go through some sort of self-registration process on the captive web portal, and allows them to fill out a form, their guest information, and then their credential and whatever form it is delivered to them via a printed receipt, an SMS message that comes to their phone, or possibly some other method, email, for example. Very often, some services allow you to customize these self-registration guest credential delivery service capabilities. There's even self-service kiosk and applications available out there. And the whole point of this is very often these guest management solutions, the self-registration trend is so that your receptionist isn't bothered and it doesn't tie up valuable time. But you can still collect the data on the users and allow them to self-register and then eventually get onto the guest network. One trend that depends on the vertical, but this is actually popular in retail. One self-registration trend is social login capabilities. And you see this a lot in the retail and the service industries. Social login is a method used of existing credentials, like from a social networking service that allows you to then get guest access. So you actually use your Gmail account to get on. One of the reasons this is popular in retail, it allows them to build a database, a marketing database, and get also all the information that based on your LinkedIn account can be shared with the retailer. So there is some privacy concerns with this. So very often, if this is the way you're offering guest access, there's going to have to be some sort of opt-in process or opt-out process, I should say. Just so you know, social login uses a protocol called OAuth 2.0. There's a whole authorization framework built around this. Look, you see it all the time on the web. You use this protocol and you use social login capabilities just to get on websites. Well, the same thing can be tied to Wi-Fi guest access. Another onboarding process that is actually maybe it's actually counter to the whole self-registration concept is the employee sponsorship concept. So some companies might have more restrictive security policies, and they don't want anybody even getting on the guest network unless they've been approved by an employee either in advance or as the guest is registering. So when the guest registers through a captive web portal, they put in their information and they put in their employee sponsor's email. And what that does is then it sends an email to the employee if this is being done in real time. This can also be set up in advance as well. And as soon as that email, or it could be an SMS message for that matter, goes to the employee that, hey, your guest is here, they're in the lobby. The two things happen here is notifying them that the guest is there, and it says, are you going to give them Wi-Fi access? And as soon as they click the approve in that email, the employee does that, then the guest user can get onto the Wi-Fi. Cannot do that before that. And some of the better guest management solutions are obviously going to have full-blown employee sponsorship. So, and sometimes you'll see companies do employee sponsorship and also have self-registration capabilities. Just depends on what they're trying to accomplish and what level of security they need for the guest users. So another thing I wanted to talk about today is the concept of secure guest access. Now, the majority of guest SSIDs are still open, meaning no encryption, and their authentication protocols are pretty light as well. It's basically just going through a captive web portal is the authentication method. But there is a trend lately to offer secure guest access. And I want you to know that we have ways of doing that here at Extreme. And let's talk about some different options for secure guest access. So the growing trend is to provide secure authentication and encryption for guest access. A very popular solution that with Extreme customers and partners alike has been the Extreme Networks private pre-shared key solution, where all users have a unique PPSK security credential. We actually did a webinar on this back last December about this particular type of security that we offer. What the beauty of it is, it gives you multiple per user and per device PSKs that are assigned to a single guest SSID. So there's no need for PKI, certificates, radio servers. It's easy to deploy, easy to troubleshoot, and it solves the static PSK problem. But the most important thing about this, if you're using it for guest access, it's kind of a value-added service for your guest users because you're providing some extra level of security for the guest users. Your PPSK provides encryption and data privacy for the guests. And it also provides visibility for you for tracking your guests because they have unique authentication credentials. So it's a value added service. Our PPSK solution, we have a whole API built around it. So we have customers have built their own applications specifically for guest access. Here's a company called the PPSK Kiosk that actually sells kiosk that can distribute PPSK credentials for guest access for self-registration purposes, and that is available. Now, another thing you might hear a little bit about guest access is Passpoint or HotSpot 2.0. Now, I got to be honest with you, this typically isn't used for just standard company guest access, but it has grown in popularity at the hotspots. So like the Boingos of the world, and maybe you'll see this at airports and public access networks. So what's the difference between Passpoint and HotSpot 2.0? Well, Passpoint is the brand for the certification program operated by the Wi-Fi Alliance. Devices that pass this certification are tested to the HotSpot 2.0 specification, okay? Once they get tested and they pass, they're known as Passpoint certified. So HotSpot 2.0 is kind of the specification, and Passpoint is the certification. You'll probably hear it more commonly referred to as Passpoint. What is the goal of Passpoint? The goal is to make public and commercial Wi-Fi networks secure and easy to use easy to secure and use as you would in maybe the enterprise and at home. In other words, secure authentication and encryption. It's also used to offload cellular traffic from the cellular services. You should know that Passpoint is not really used necessarily in the enterprise, but it is used a lot, as I mentioned, in the commercial hotspot providers like Boingo. These mechanisms, Passpoint and HotSpot 2.0, are essential to the Open Roaming Initiative that is sponsored by the Wireless Broadband Alliance, as well as the Wi-Fi for Europe initiative that's going on in Europe right now. So how does Passpoint work? Well, you know what? We could do a 3-hour webinar on how HotSpot 2.0 and Passpoint works. We don't have that. I'll just say this is one of the most complex things I've ever dealt with and learned about. And I think a lot of people that are members of the Wi-Fi Alliance will tell you the same thing. There's a whole architecture behind it. At a hotspot location, the Passpoint enabled clients use a protocol called ANQP, Access Network Query Protocol. And that's to find out about information about the venue, the hotspot venue, about the cellular services, the service providers, whether it's 3G, 4G, or 5G, what authentication is being used, because either EAP AKA for phones or EAP TLS, and a lot of other information. So roaming agreements. It's very complex. To be honest with you, all the hard parts on the back end. It's all the integration with the service providers. So for example, all of our APs are support Passpoint, and they can talk to any of these service providers. It's configuring them for Passpoint capabilities isn't that hard. It's just the integration with the back end. That's where all the hard stuff is. Once again, this is more of a public access thing as opposed to an enterprise guest access, but it is an option, and it does provide security at public networks. Now, there is another trend you're going to hear more about in coming year or two, is something about a protocol called Opportunistic Wireless Encryption. Traditionally, once again, wireless LANs have been open without encryption and authentication. So there is a certification called Wi-Fi Certified Enhanced Open. It's a security certification that defines improved data privacy in open Wi-Fi networks. Now, this is an optional Wi-Fi security certification, and then I need to emphasize this is important. It's not part of WPA3. WPA3 is mandated. The enhanced open that uses OWE is not mandated. Now, and without getting too technical, what OWE does, it still uses open authentication, excuse me. It still uses open authentication, but after the open authentication and the association request happens, it does a process called the four-way handshake to create encryption keys. So in other words, what you have is you have an encrypted guest access, but there is no authentication method. So please do not confuse this with WPA3 personal, which uses simultaneous authentication of equals, which is the eventual replacement for PSK security. This is a separate whole protocol called OWE. For this to work, it has to be supported on both the AP on the client side. And that's where you need to know is that almost zero clients support OWE. I mean, it's starting to change, but most clients do not support OWE. So there hasn't really been that many tactical deployments of using enhanced open and OWE yet. Now, that being said, the FCC has opened up 6 gigahertz, and when 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi is available to all of us, there's going to be new security. Number one, WPA3 will be mandatory. And also there will be no more open SSIDs, meaning OWE and enhanced open will also be mandatory. And so you will, if you decide to use like an open network, you'll at least have encryption using OWE. I'll make the argument you're better off just going with one of the better WPA3 solutions, but that's a topic for another day. Bottom line, the main takeaway I want you to take from this is when this does happen down the road, we're probably going to have different levels of security on 6 gigahertz and 2.4 and 5, simply because the 15 billion Wi-Fi devices that are out there that are never going to connect to 6 gigahertz, most of them are probably still using WPA2. So I think what you're going to see is different levels of security on the different bands moving forward. So that also has implications for guest access. So be aware of that. So another big thing that is growing in popularity in terms of guest access is the analytics that your company can get from the guest users that are connecting to your guest networks. And this is very important, especially in service industries and retail, but it can be in really any vertical now. It could be in healthcare even. Whatever, because everybody offers guest access, so having analytics available to you is going to be powerful. So let's talk about that. So multiple companies exist that specialize in guest access for Wi-Fi, and many of the ones that I mentioned that offer the third-party onboarding solutions also offer logging capabilities, but they and typically these are overlay solutions, and then these overlay solutions typically also have guest analytics. Pardon me. Gotta stay hydrated. So they offer guest analytics as well. So some of the guest analytics could be guest data usage. It could be comparative guest analytics by location. So maybe you're a retailer and you have multiple locations. You want to do comparisons of those locations. Very often it is versus returning guest users. That can be useful information. Trending reports over time, and also guest user dwell time, like how long they dwelled, like say in your store, presence analytics, for example. And so, analytics solutions, like I said, a lot of these are offered as third-party overlay solutions that you have to purchase and pay for. And a lot of people are willing to do that, and especially in the retail vertical. But what's going to really change this a lot is the cloud. So the cloud is going to change the interpretation of guest analytics data simply because of the power of the cloud. ExtremeCloud IQ, we take in over 5 petabytes of traffic every day from our customer networks, and that number is going up. To explain what that means, 1 petabyte is equal to like 13.3 years of high definition video streaming. So we can take all that information, store it, and then analyze it. And not just your stuff, but also other people's stuff. Everything has to be anonymous. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of security and privacy concerns behind this as well. And then we can have a whole separate conversation about all the many steps we take in terms of our cloud data security and third-party security validation. I know the terms of data science and machine learning and AI are overused buzzwords, but it's a real thing. And if you have lots of data, the more data you have, the better your machine learning is. We've also announced last year that we have unlimited data. So any of our customers, as soon as they set up an account, they have access to their data in the cloud for unlimited time, in real time. And nobody else is doing that. But bottom line is being able to access that data and run machine learning algorithms on that is you're going to get better insights, and including into guest behaviors that I mentioned earlier. So moving forward, I think we'll see even greater things happen in the terms of guest analytics, and cloud's going to drive that. Cloud's going to drive network analytics for all aspects of network analytics. Which brings me to the big plug. Okay, you didn't think you were going to get out here with some sort of marketing plug, right? I'm actually very excited about this. It's called ExtremeCloud IQ Essentials ExtremeGuest. So we have recently added into our ExtremeCloud IQ networking management platform a guest management platform as basically an application inside an application. So what ExtremeGuest Essentials does is it provides guest onboarding and analytics for any kind of size distributed organization, as well as an enterprise campus, deployments, or whatever vertical for that matter. ExtremeGuest Essentials is a simple and secure and sophisticated, I would say, guest access solution that provides pre-access, which is the onboarding. It provides access, which is the policy enforcement, and then also does post-access, which is the analytics, all packaged into one application. Now, let's talk a little bit more about that. It has so many features. I'm not going to go over every one of them, but as I mentioned, you have guest registration options, and we have self-registration with SMS, email, social login, employee sponsorship. We have this whole captive web portal splash page templates that are drag and drop, and widgets be done per location. They're all just basically ready to go. We have the access control built into this as well. Session time, you can do rate limiting if you want, and this can be time-based credentials as well. And then you have the analytics. So all those analytics I was showing you before were actually screenshots from our ExtremeGuest Essentials solution. So you have the trends and the new versus repeat users and all kinds of reporting capabilities. One of the coolest things that I like about ExtremeGuest Essentials is the onboarding policies that you can build straight into the system. So you can define based on an email domain or a sponsored email or social media type or the type of user or the device type or how many devices a users can access with. You can define all these things with all these and then to tie them to other rules in terms of your guest access, and you just follow the workflow right there in the application, and it just builds your guest access solution right for you. So it's really a plug and play, simplified, full-blown guest solution. And of course, the analytics is a big extra value as well. So you should know that ExtremeGuest Essentials isn't our only Essentials application. In the past few months, we've added 4 applications into ExtremeCloud IQ. And those 4 applications are ExtremeGuest Essentials, Extreme Location Essentials, IoT Essentials, and Air Defense Essentials, which is our WIP solution. And these are 4 full-blown applications that in most cases, most companies are going to sell you either as an overlay solution or you're going to have to go to a third-party solution. We have fully integrated these 4 apps into ExtremeCloud IQ, but I saved the best part for last. There's no additional cost. So if you have the standard pilot license for ExtremeCloud IQ in our cloud management solution, these 4 apps I just mentioned, they all come full blown. So you don't have to pay for a third-party guest management solution extra, or you don't have to pay extra licensing to your networking vendor for their guest access solution. Okay, you get it all standard, built right into the cloud with the standard pilot license. So I just will quickly comment a little bit more on these various solutions. Air Defense Essentials. Air Defense is a time-tested best of breed WIP solution, and we're bringing it into the cloud for rogue detection and 40 plus other threats in terms of Wi-Fi and other RF technologies. Maybe you were able to catch the webinar we had 2 weeks ago about location essentials. We have a full-blown solution on location essentials for access tracking, as well as presence analytics, and anything to do with location, whether it either be BLE or Wi-Fi. It's not an overlay solution, it's integrated. And then we have the guest essentials, which has been kind of the talk, everything right here. And then we also have an IoT solution, essentials, that is used to secure IoT devices. And that's what our next webinar is going to be in about 3 weeks. We're going to talk about IoT security, and we'll talk more about the IoT essentials when we have that webinar. So I hope you'll join us for that. You want to learn more about our guest essentials? Take your smartphone real quick and scan that QR code, or just take go straight to that URL right there. And Rich Hunt, our esteemed member of the product team, has recorded a 6-minute video and demo of ExtremeGuest Essentials, and you can see it and watch it, and you'll get a better idea of all the capabilities, because I have limited time here, and I think you're going to be impressed. And I would encourage all of our existing ExtremeCloud IQ users to go turn this on. If you're a pilot, you already have it, and try it out. You're going to love it. And if you're not an ExtremeCloud customer yet, you will be eventually. Go to extremecloudiq.com, sign up for a trial account, and you can also test this as well with the trial account. So I highly encourage you to watch the video and learn more about ExtremeGuest Essentials. All right, so I'm actually ahead of time here, so we may even end a little bit early. That being said, we always have time for questions. So Kyle, my man, hit me.
Yeah, for sure. Let's dive into these, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. So looks like first one we got here. Does ExtremeGuest Essentials support all models of your access points?
Yes, all are cloud-based APs. There is no hardware or AP model dependency per se. There is a minimum firmware requirement, and I believe, depending on the models of cloud-based APs, it's either 10.10R2 or 10.2R3 or higher firmware. So just be aware of that, but there is no dependency on the cloud-based AP models.
Awesome, cool. Next question, does ExtremeGuest Essentials support SMS messages for onboarding? And this one's a couple-part question. The second part to that, and is SMS supported? And is a third-party SMS gateway or service required?
Okay, so that was a lot of questions in one. Bottom line, we support the SMS messaging in ExtremeGuest Essentials. It's part of one of your onboarding options in that onboarding wizard that I was showing you. And here's the cool thing, it's natively built into the cloud. So there's no third-party gateway, and there's no extra cost involved. So, and you get ExtremeGuest Essentials anyway with your pilot license, and we're not going to charge you for the SMS capabilities either. So I just want to remind everybody that the entire ExtremeGuest Essentials application comes with no extra licensing with your standard pilot license.
Awesome, great. Next question. is PPSK, private pre-shared key, supported in analytics of ExtremeGuest Essentials?
So that's a good question. So the first version of ExtremeGuest Essentials that debuted a few weeks ago in the month of December only currently supports open guest SSIDs, which are still, believe it or not, the most popular. However, PPSK, you should know, is fully supported in ExtremeCloud IQ as an additional guest option, and with numerous separate onboarding workflows and lots of authentication visibility. But right now, PPSK is not integrated yet currently with ExtremeGuest Essentials. So legal disclaimer, roadmap is always subject to change, but you did hear me speak a lot about the trend towards secure guest access, whether it be PPSK, Passpoint, or others. We've invested a lot to bring guest analytics into the cloud. We also support all these secure guest access solutions. So I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions about roadmap, but I can't commit to anything. Let me put it that way.
Awesome. Appreciate that clarification. Next question we got here that I'll present to you. Where are the captive web portals in your guest management solutions, and are they cloud-based?
It depends, really. With ExtremeGuest Essentials, they're cloud-based. However, all our cloud APs also have the capability. They have captive web portals built into them as well. So we have 9 different ways to skin a cat. Okay, ExtremeGuest Essentials has just added a whole lot more. If you're using that workflow, and ExtremeGuest Essentials is going to be a cloud-based plug and play solution where you can fully customize. By the way, I don't think I got into that enough, how easy it is to customize all the templates that we provide for ExtremeGuest Essentials. But we also have templates for the captive web portals that reside in our APs. Additionally, our cloud-based APs can also talk to a third-party captive web portal solution too. So, I mean, whatever you want to do, hopefully you don't really need a third party anymore, because we pretty much give you an entire package.
Awesome, great. Next question we got here. Can you blacklist individual guest users by contact info or MAC address?
Blocking guests manually is available. You can also set predefined rules by OUI rules to deny certain types of guests in that onboarding workflow that I showed a picture of. So that can be done as an onboarding rule, and maybe you could define a very specific OUI or a specific MAC address if you wanted to do that.
Awesome, appreciate it, David. Couple more here that I'll present, and then you can sort of look through some more that you may want to prioritize before we wrap up here. Is there a way to identify repeat guest users to send them a welcome back message instead of the same welcome message each time?
Let me think about that. Yeah, so in the onboarding workflows in ExtremeGuest Essentials, you can define how many times a welcome back message is displayed to a user. So the short answer is yes.
Gotcha. Cool. And then another question we got here, is there an extra license and cost for the guest analytics?
Oh, okay. I'm guessing that question was asked before I brought it up, because I did say that kind of towards the end. The answer is no. If you have a pilot license, which is your standard license with ExtremeCloud IQ, you get the Essentials app, Guest Essentials, for no extra costs and no additional license. And the same is true for our other 3 Essentials applications, IoT Essentials, Air Defense Essentials, and Location Essentials. So we view these, in the past, these applications have always been considered an extra value that you'd be willing to pay for. And thus we came up with the name Essentials. We view these things as essential to your network management. So no extra licensing. We're providing these 4 applications as part of the service.
Great, thanks for clarifying that, David. We got a few minutes left. Some more questions. that we have.
Let me-
So I don't know if you want to run through those and see.
Yeah,
which
just
ones
let me
you may
look
want to
real
answer.
quick. If you
Cool.
give me just 1 second, let me see if I can pick out one or cherry pick one or two more, since we got a few more questions.
Go for it.
I see a lot of people making comments and debating whether or not to use rate limiting. And like I said, things like that are up to the up to the customer. One question: can you rate limit on PPSK SSIDs? The answer is yes, because we actually do it normally at the user level, and then you tie the user guest user profile to the PPSK SSID. The answer to that is yes. When will the Guest Essentials app be available to Cloud IQ users? I have a pilot license and I don't see that. So it is this, you should know that the Essentials app is only in the public cloud. So if you're using the on-prem solution, that's probably why you're not seeing it, okay? So you'll hear more announcements about some really cool things we're gonna be doing in terms of on-premises capabilities. I'm not at liberty to talk about that right now. So we'll have but right now, all the Essentials apps, you have to be tied to the public cloud. And let me just see if I can see another one or two. Okay, there's about 6 or 7 more, but I'm going to save these and we can just answer them via email post webinar here. I know we're a little bit early here, but that's okay. Oops, sorry about that. I want to show everybody one more thing to end the webinar. And that's this right here. Right here. Well, I'm having a hard time here, guys. Okay, sorry about that. So you guys could see me reading the questions in real time. But here's the last thing, gang, is I want you to register for our next webinar. I really appreciate everybody showing up here. I have a lot of fun doing these things. Our next one is going to be Internet of Things. I like to call it the new security frontier. Go right here to this QR code or that URL and you can register. I believe, Kyle, this is in like 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. We'll also be talking about the new application that's tied to this as well, IoT Essentials. So let us know, and we hope you join us. And I want to thank everybody for joining today, and everybody have a happy day, and go to extremecloudiq.com.
All right, and one final thing just to wrap up. You guys will be receiving a link to the recording of this session today. You will get that by end of day tomorrow at the latest, along with a copy of the presentation today as well. So just be on the lookout for that as well. And as David mentioned, be sure to register and please attend our Internet of Things session, which will be on February 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. But aside from that, David, thanks for the awesome webinar today. And everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.